Hi, I'm Emmett and welcome to my channel. Today I am going to review Nikon's 24 to 200mm Z lens. So I think most photographers out there are going to be familiar with this scenario. You're out somewhere with friends, maybe you're hiking or you're just out around town, and you see a really great photograph, but you've got the wrong lens on your camera. Either you need to get closer to it, you need to get farther away, and so at this point you really have two options. Either if you brought other lenses with you, you can stop and change your lens, and while you do that, your friends are probably going to walk on and then you'll have to try to catch up with them. Or you can just pass up that photograph, keep going, and leave it. And that kind of is the price of using high quality lenses and getting really satisfactory quality photos, right? Well, until now. And I think that this lens really changes all of that. Now, what Nikon was anticipating when they made this lens, or perhaps not anticipating because it took them quite a while to get this lens out, but what they realized eventually was that many photographers switching to their mirrorless camera system, their Z cameras, were going to find themselves in the situation that I did when I recently made that switch. And that is that I really only had the money in my budget to purchase one Z lens. The Z lenses tend to be fairly expensive. They're high quality, but they're quite expensive. And there's only so much money that I can justify spending on something that really is just a hobby, especially after I've already spent $2,000 on the camera body too. And so I did purchase the FTZ adapter in order to adapt my old DX lenses, but those aren't as high of a quality, and they're only operating at 10 megapixels because of that crop factor of the lens. It just can't cover the whole sensor. And so I did want to pick up a Z lens as well, a native lens for the camera that could really show me what this system can do. I think that a lot of people will start off with the 24 to 70 millimeter S-line lens that Nikon has made for the Z system, with a f4 aperture. And while that lens is hardly cheap at about $1,000, it is significantly cheaper than some of the higher end lenses that they have, and it does allow you to cover a pretty decent range of focal lengths. And while it's in that S line, it's supposed to be some of the highest quality glass that Nikon has to offer. And so for a lot of people, that's been a really great place to start, particularly before this lens was available. But this lens here covers pretty much every focal length that you would want for normal use. You can start out at that 24 millimeters, which, while hardly being an ultra wide lens, is perfectly wide enough for landscape photography, some indoor things, etc. And you can go all the way up to 200 millimeters, which this isn't any sort of a super telephoto lens. You're not going to do wildlife photography with it, but it's perfectly good for those normal zoom lens scenarios that you might encounter. And so effectively, this is both a wide angle lens and a telephoto all in one. On top of that, this lens only costs $900, so it's going to be $100 cheaper than that 24 to 70 millimeter lens. Now, at this point, I assume that you are thinking what I was thinking when I first saw this lens, which was there's literally no way that this can be any good. It's an all-around lens for a comparatively budget price. It's really a kit lens among kit lenses, if you will. It's got a huge array of focal lengths, a variable aperture, and a low price, and it just really doesn't seem like it can be any good. From the spec sheet given, the price that it is, I was really kind of expecting the quality to look something like the 18 to 55mm kit lens that came with my D30-100, which just never seems to even be able to focus on the subject correctly. So, is that the reality? Is this a terrible lens? Or is this lens actually any good? Well, the short answer to that is yes, this actually is a good lens. It's very surprisingly so. You can actually tell that this is a good lens from the moment that you take it out of the box. It's made of mostly metal. It has a metal bayonet on the back of it, and it just seems nice and sturdy. And while it's not super heavy, it does have a little bit of a heft to it. There's a large glass element on the front, and it just really looks and feels pretty high quality. Now, with the design of this lens, there is only one switch on the lens right here, and one ring on the lens, and the switch is not really to do anything useful. Instead, it's to lock the lens closed so that you can't zoom it out when it's sitting in your bag or something like that. And I'm honestly not even sure why you would want that. So there's not a switch to turn the vibration reduction of the lens on and off, as you find a lot of times. This lens does have vibration reduction in it, I assume to support the Z50 that does not have in-body stabilization. And there's not a switch on here to switch you from autofocus to manual focus, which you also do oftentimes find on the side of the lens. Now, that's not to say that you can't use manual focus with this lens. You can twist the wheel on the lens while you have the shutter button half pressed, which by default is going to adjust the focus of the lens, or you can manually set the camera into manual focus, and then it will be in manual focus all the time. The autofocus is turned off at that point, just like the switch on the lens would. So while this lens might not have been really designed with manual focus in mind, it's definitely still a possibility if that's something that you need. Although, for me, I don't really use manual focus that much, so I haven't really missed it on the times when I want to lock off the focus. I can just change it in the camera. So what about the sharpness of this lens? This is really, I think, the big question about the lens, since it's a cheaper lens and a wide all-around lens, and in my opinion, the sharpness of this lens is actually quite excellent. Now, I really don't think that this is going to give you as sharp of photographs as lenses in Nikon's S line, but I don't think that it should either. Otherwise, why would those S line lenses even exist? But this lens is definitely not like potato quality either. It looks very, very good. Apart from lacking those wider apertures, this lens really behaves just as well as you would expect from any other lens in the price range that wasn't an all-around lens, and perhaps even better than you would expect it to at that $900 price point. This lens autofocuses very nicely, and pretty much every photo that I have taken with it has looked tack sharp, at least at a normal level of zoom. If you get into really zooming in and pixel peeping, that's when you'll start to notice maybe that it's not as sharp as some images from the S-line lenses. But if you're looking at it at any really normal zoom level, it looks really sharp. So let's go ahead and take a few images here, and then we'll see what those look like. Okay, so I shot some pictures with this lens. Now these photos are not going to be examples of any beautiful photographs or really be a representation of the kinds of photos that this lens and this camera combination can produce, because I really wanted to put the lens into situations that would test its unique characteristics and flaws. If you want to see some beautiful photos taken with this lens, check out my last few landscape photography videos or my Instagram, and I'll run a few across the screen here for you as well. But here I really wanted to run some tests for vignetting, lens flare, and fringing, which are the most noticeable flaws that a lens can have. First off, vignetting. To test this, I shot several images with different apertures at 24 and 200 millimeters. These are just on a white piece of foam core with a memory card there to give me something to focus on, and they look pretty blue because I was using a flash and I didn't white balance the camera again. As you can see, there's some vignetting at the widest apertures, but it essentially disappears by about f8. Now it's important to note that I almost never see this in real world photos. It's quite subtle here, and if you aren't shooting against a white wall, you'll probably not notice it, or if you're not shooting wide open, you probably won't notice it either. If you do see it, you can stop down a bit and that will essentially remove it, but in actual photos with colored elements in them, I've only seen this in one composition, so maybe like 5 photos out of over 2,500 that I've taken now. That was shot at f6.3, so I could have stopped down to remove it if I'd realized on location that it was there, and so that's something that I will keep in mind in the future. Moving on to the lens flare, I set up an extremely bright flashlight just behind this lens hood that comes with the lens, and you can see what the flare looks like here at 24 millimeters, which I've cropped in on it, and then here at 200 millimeters. I don't really think that lens flare is a problem, at least for me. In my opinion, it gives the lens and the photos a bit of character, and I like when it looks something like this. It's not too big, washing out the photo, but it's not just a tiny weird spot either. In most situations, you won't actually see flare. I was really trying to create it here, but if you have a bright light or the sun right in your shot, then you will see it. And then finally is chromatic aberration, and particularly fringing, which is actually pretty rare in this lens, but is also fairly inconsistent. On these photos testing the flare, you didn't see it occur at all, nor could you see it on the photos of backlit leaves and grasses that I've taken, both of which would cause a lot of fringing on cheaper lenses. On this one here with a flashlight set up behind the little cactus, I was able to create some, so that gives you an idea of how it does look when it actually occurs. But it is quite easy to remove this in your photo editor, and it really doesn't happen that often. Alright, so what about the aperture of this lens? This is a f4 to 6.3 variable aperture lens, so you can widen it out to that f4 when it is all the way at the 24 range, but as you extend the lens you have to stop down the aperture. And in comparison to the 24 to 70 millimeter lens, which is f4 all the way through, this lens, once you hit the 70 millimeters, you are obliged to stop it down to f6. So you are losing quite a bit of light that way, although that's sort of a minor issue really with the sensor that's in this camera, and you're also losing some of that depth of field. That being said, you're really not getting a super creamy depth of field with that f4 lens either. Now, you can of course move up to the 24 to 70 millimeter f2.8 S-line lens, but that is going to cost you $2,300, which is more than the camera body. It's over twice the cost than its slower rival. And so again, if you're someone who's coming at this wanting a lens on a budget, that's just not going to be probably feasible for you. So obviously that lens is going to perform better, but it's just at a much higher price point. So this is really the main drawback of this lens, is just that you can't get that wide of an aperture with it. But you're not going to be surprised at all by that. The main drawback of the lens is just what's listed on the spec sheet there. So, you know, you're not going to get it and discover, oh, it's not sharp or something like that. You really know what you're getting into, which I think is good. Now, whether or not that f4 to 6.3 range is going to be enough for you just depends a lot on the situation. I mostly do landscape photography, and for that it's really quite good, because I, even at that, don't usually shoot it wide open. A lot of times I want to get a lot of sharpness throughout the image, and so I'll stop the lens down quite a bit in order to get a broader depth of field. But I do sometimes take other pictures like portraits or still lifes, as well as when I'm videoing myself, and find myself wanting a wider aperture in order to get a shallower depth of field on those. And so for that, I do often find myself putting back on the 35mm 1.8 DX lens on top of the FTZ adapter, and then that has a crop factor on it, and so I have to step back a little bit farther from the subject. And so for that reason, I am pretty excited about a new lens that Nikon's coming out with, which is the 40mm f2 lens for the Z system. And so I'll definitely have a review of that for you guys whenever I get it. It's kind of a budget lens with a wider aperture, just like the 1.8 lens that I've been using and really loving for quite a while now. Having said that, I will make a review of it, but it is back ordered right now and I have not gotten any word on when I will get it. It seems like lenses are pretty hard to get right now, at least here, and so hopefully I'll get it soon and I'll have a review for you whenever I do. I'm very excited to get it. But like I said, for those kinds of portraits or still lifes or something, this lens does leave something to be desired in the aperture department. It's gonna look really sharp, and if you've zoomed in a long way, you can get a good depth of field from it, but that's not always really that feasible. And so if that's something that you do a lot, this might not be the lens you'd want to choose, as well as if portraits or other pictures in very low light settings or something that you do a lot, this might also not be the lens that you'd want to choose. But you know what you're getting into with that. Nikon never claimed that this lens had a wider aperture than it does, and so you know, you can't really hold that against it at the price range and the variety of focal lengths that it has. And having said all of that, you certainly can shoot portraits or whatever you want with this lens in those casual scenarios, right? So if you are wanting to shoot some family pictures or some pictures at night or something like that, and you have this lens on your camera, it's not going to be a problem for you. It's just to say that if you're professionally doing that, this might not be your best option. Even if you're out at night, you can use a pretty low shutter speed and or a high ISO. Maybe you have to sacrifice a little bit of blurring or grain here and there, despite the great performance really of the Z cameras. But you know, you're still going to get a photo as long as there's enough light for your autofocus to work. So this is a great all-around lens really if you just want to have one lens on your camera most of the time and not have to worry about switching too much in those more casual scenarios. Now, what about the weight of this lens? If you're looking at buying one lens for everything, it might be because you're looking at doing some hiking or something and you don't want your lens to weigh too crazy much. And I would say the weight of this is not too ridiculous. It's certainly lighter than if you were to have, say, two lenses to cover this same focal range. It's a bit heftier than it might be if it were, say, a plastic lens. But, you know, we could throw it on a scale and you can see that it's just really not too heavy. It's fairly light for the broad focal range that it covers. So finally, is this lens a good value and would I recommend it to you? I would say yes. I think this lens is a great value and I would highly recommend it really to anyone who's looking maybe to lighten their camera bag by carrying less lenses. If you're doing some hiking or some traveling and you just want to have one lens on the camera to carry around with you all day, I think this is a great option for that. Or if, like me, it's your introduction to the Z system and you want to get just one Z lens to kind of cover everything so that you have a native lens for this camera without really breaking the bank, I think this is a great option for that. For $900, this lens is absolutely outstanding. It performs quite well. The build quality of it, like I said, is really solid. It covers a massive focal range, and like I said at the beginning of the video, I have had so many times when I've seen a great picture and I've had the wrong lens on my camera, and so I've had to switch. And for, you know, traveling or something like that, you might be out doing some tourism, you're walking around all day, it's really nice to just have one lens, not have a whole bag of lenses with you. And this lens is great for that because you can just put this one lens on and you're pretty much good to go for about any kind of picture that you might want to take. So if you're a professional wanting to professionally do a particular type of photograph, this may not be the best lens for you because you're probably going to want the absolute highest quality for a very specific thing, and so those more specific S-line lenses are going to be better. But if you're in that situation, you're probably going to have more money to put into that as well, since you're actually earning some money from those photos. But otherwise, this is a great lens. It's very light and versatile. It's great for casual portraits or family photos. It's great for landscape photography. It's great for travel. And so personally, I highly recommend this lens. So that's going to be all for today, guys. And so if this video was helpful to you, don't forget to hit the like button on your way out, as well as to subscribe to the channel for some more videos like this, videos of me out doing some landscape photography and other things like that. And also be watching for that review of the 40mm lens in the future whenever I get that. Hopefully it won't be too long, but I really have no idea. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.